this Zoom class will be recorded and it will be posted in D2L. I am really praying that this is something minor, so that's why I set up appointment with the doctor today. So I will see her around 4 o'clock. So hopefully I will be doing well. Another announcement to make is tomorrow there's no class. So I know we don't meet on Tuesday. So North Hennepin have no school tomorrow. The teacher has some in-service. So you guys do not need to come to class. So if you have any classes that meets on Tuesday, which is tomorrow, please do not show up. Announcement. The first announcement is your homework. Your homework, you only got one homework due on this coming Wednesday, which is 1.2. And then here is the bad news I will tell you. Here is on next week, you will have 4 homeworks due. And the reason why there are 4 homeworks due on next week is because next week is the last week of this class. As I mentioned, this class runs for 5 weeks. This is actually week number 4. So, next week it will be 4 homeworks due. 3 of them is due on Wednesday, and then the last one is due on Thursday. So chapter 1 only have 5 sections of homework. So if you have any questions with your homework, please let me know. So on Thursday, we talk about the linear equations in one variable, how we solve linear equations. So today we will talk about quadratic equations. Okay, so that is the main part of today's class. This is the notes for 1.4. So again, I already printed out the notes for you guys and it is sitting in my office. So hopefully on Wednesday, you will get the notes. So make sure you guys got this. This is, this part is very important, this section 1.4. So we're going to start the class today. Does anyone have any questions for me? So in 1.4, we will do quadratic equations and its application. Okay. So quadratic equations is written down in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. This is what we call as a general form. Just want to make sure you guys know that this quadratic equations, the highest power or degree in this case is 2. So last time when you guys did the linear equation in 1.2, we don't have the x squared. We only solve this as a linear because its x here is only power 1. So when you look back at Thursday when we do 1.2, so if you do not have an x squared, which you have only bx plus c, this is called the linear equation that you guys learned in 1.2. But for this section 1.4, we will have a quadratic equations where you got ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. So that means that now your polynomials here is a square in this case. A, B, C in this case can be any numbers, any real numbers, and A cannot be 0. That means you do need to have an x squared. So if you look at all the examples that we did in this section, you will tell that they are all quadratic equations because they all have x squared next to it. Okay. So on top of these quadratic equations, you will also do what we call as applications. So what is applications? Application is what we call as word problems. So you will see some word problems at the end of this class here, where it is talking about, it's all used about quadratic equations. So some of you will ask me, do we guys have any word problems for this coming up test, which is your final? I will say that yes, you will have some word problems in this case. They are either quadratic equation type, which is like this, or it will be a linear equation type, means you don't have an x squared. Okay, and I will show to you what is the difference between the word problems on the quadratic equations and the word problems for the linear equations. So for me, I will concentrate more on the word problems on the quadratic type. Okay. If you have a quadratic equations, as you know, this is equation, we have to solve the equation. So how many ways can we solve the quadratic equations? There are 4 ways. You can solve this by factoring. You can solve a quadratic equation using extracting the square root, completing the squares, and you can solve this using quadratic formulas. So there are 4 ways that you can solve a quadratic equation. Now, for me, I will concentrate on factoring. Okay, this is what I will concentrate on because factoring will make things easy. I will also concentrate on quadratic formulas. The one that I will not concentrate on is completing the squares. So again, if you do my online homework, sometimes they call you to do, I want you to solve this using this method or this method or that method. In my finals, I don't tell you what methods to use. I just say solve it. So you can pick out of these 4 methods, you can pick any methods you want. For example, if you look carefully at some examples, like this question, they ask you to solve by factoring, by extracting square roots, by completing the square, and by quadratic formula. So, so in my test, I wouldn't say anything. I just say solve. That's it. So that's why in this class, I'm not really picky how to solve it. As long as you get the correct answer, then that's what we try to do. Now, we do the first method. First is solve using factoring. Okay. So in order for you to solve using the quadratic equation using factoring, make sure that the quadratic equations can be factored. Okay. So make sure that it can be factored. So as you aware that not all quadratic equations or quadratic form can be factored. So if you cannot factor it, then please do not use this method. Remember when we did factoring in P4, that sometimes you get prime. Prime says that the quadratic the polynomials cannot be factored. So if you cannot factor it, please do not use this method. Okay. So this method only can be used if it's factorable. So so how do you solve a quadratic equations by factoring is first you have to factor. Oh, they didn't write down this. No, let me write down more clearly. So these are the steps if you do it factoring. 1, make sure that it is make sure you have this in a general form. What do you mean by general form? General form means that it has to be equals to 0. Okay, so it has your quadratic equation has to be equal to 0. That is the first step. Second step in this case, if you want to do it factoring in this case, is you have to factor. Okay, and then the third one is where you use the zero product property, zero factor property. What is zero factor property? Zero factor property says that if you have it factor a times b equals to 0, then a equals to 0 or b equals to 0. So this is what we call as a zero product property. This is only happens if you have it been factored and it has to be equals to 0. Okay, and then the last thing is you just need to solve. Okay, so so these are the 4 steps if you want to do it by factoring. Okay, so so this is how we're going to do question example number 1. First thing is this can be factorable. So if the homework question says, solve this by factoring, means it will tell you that this quadratic equation can be factorable. So the first step is you have to make this as a general form. So general form means you have to make it equals to 0. So what do we do in this case, class, is we will need to get rid of this 6. So in order for us to get rid of this 6, we will be minus 6 on both sides. So what do we have in this case? Will be, we have 2x squared minus 3x. You know what? Let me write this down in the word in the pane here so you guys can see it clearly. So so the first question in this case is you have to do it by factoring. So we got 2x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals to 6. So we have to make this as what we call as a general form. So we have to subtract 6 on both sides to make it equal to 0. And that is what is the meaning of the general form is. So what we have in this case is 2x squared minus 3x plus minus 5, because 1 take away 6 is negative 5. And that is your first step. Second step in this case, you have to factor this. Now, in order for you to factor this is a trinomial factoring. So in order for us to factor this, and you have a leading coefficient is 2, so we have to do the AC method. Okay, so A and C is 2 and negative 5 is a negative 10. So you need to give me all the combinations. When you multiply this, you will get a negative 10. That combination is 5 and 2. But when you add them, you get negative 3. So you got a negative 5 and a positive 2. So this factor will give us 2x squared. And then the negative 3x will become negative 5x minus 2 plus 2x. Again, where is the negative 5x plus 2x? It's come from this pair. Okay. And then minus 5. So this is very similar to what you guys did in P4 or my test. And then we do this by grouping. So we cut this into half. And then you find out that you can factor x up here. So you get 2x minus 5. And then this, you can only factor 1 out because there's only thing in common. And you get 2x minus 5. And then what you have is you set these two are common factor. They are the same. So you factor it out, it becomes 2x minus 5. And then the leftover x plus 1, you put it on this side. And this is all going to be equals to 0. Don't forget, we have equals to 0. Okay. Because this is an equation now. So that's the reason why the difference between you learn in P4 is those are expression. Okay. So this method that we just did there is the second method or second step, which called factor. So now we will do the third step, which is using the zero factor property. What is a zero factor property says is you take each one of these factor and you make it equals to 0. So you take 2x minus 5 equals to 0. And you take x plus 1 equals to 0. So what we did here is called the zero factor property, where you take each one of these factor of these multiples and make it equals to 0. And then you solve for x for each case. So here, in order for you to solve for x, I have to add 5 first. So I get 5. So I add 5 to that side, and then I divide both sides by 2. So you will get 5 over 2. And then for this case, you have to subtract 1. So you will get negative 1. So usually, when you guys have a quadratic equations, you will get up to 2 solutions. Okay. So this is why when you do your homework for this section 1.4, you can go up to 2 answers in this case. Okay. So last time when you did the linear equation in 1.2, you only get one answer here. So, but when you guys do this in the quadratic equations, you will get two solutions here, okay? So this is how we solve a quadratic equation using factoring. Now, again, checking in this case is optional. So if you want to check, what you need to do is plug these two answers. You do one by one first. So you plug 5/2 into your x and check if you get this exactly 6. And then you also plug -1 into this equation and see if you get 6 too. So again, checking in this case is optional. So if you want to check, your answer is up to you. Okay. So this is how you solve these equations, quadratic equations, by factoring. Okay. These are the 4 steps. And I want to tell you that you can only do this method when your equations can be factored. Means that this is factorable. Okay. So if this is factorable, you can do this method. Questions, anyone? So as I mentioned, factoring is very important for us. Okay. Now, some of you will ask me, David, can I use this method on, can I use it on extracting the square root or complete square quadratic formula? The answers are, or I will say that yes, you can do the other 3 methods. So that's why this kind of examples I show it to you is you can do it as many methods as you want, as long as your answer is the same. Okay. Now, this is the first method I show it to you by factoring. So the second method I will show it to you here is solve these quadratic equations by using extracting the square root. Now, the extracting the square root is where if you have no middle term, okay? This method is widely used if you have no middle term. What does that mean when I say middle term? That means you don't have bx. That means you only have ax squared and c. So if you only have 2 terms, which is the ax squared and c, you don't have a middle term, extracting the square root will be the best way for you to solve this quadratic equations. Yes, you can solve it in the other 3 ways too. What is extracting the square root? When you do extracting the square root, you do not want to make this as a general form. You want to make that your u squared here is equals to d, and make sure that d in this case has to be greater than 0. I will tell you why. So what do we do here is, in order for us to get rid of the square, we square root both sides. However, when you square root both sides, this is something very, very important if you're going to do this method, is you need to have plus and minuses, okay? So this is where a lot of students will get wrong if you're extracting the square root method here, is they forget to do plus and minuses. So in other words, you also will have 2 answers here. One of them is positive and one of them is negative, okay? And again, class, this extracting square root method is used if you do not have a middle term. Example in this case will be like x squared minus 4 equals to 0. Okay, so I give you another quick, easy example. So we're not going to do number 2 yet. So I will give you a very quick example how we do this, extracting the square root. Example will be x squared minus 4 equals to 0. And again, you notice that this quadratic equation has no middle term, has no x term, no bx terms here. So how do we use this extracting square root procedure to solve this? Is first, makes this x squared by itself. So I will need to add 4 to that side. So I will add 4 on this. So kind of like solving equations that you guys did in the last section. So your x squared is by itself, and then you get 4 because 0 plus 4 is 4. And now since you get x squared by itself, so in order for us to get rid of this square, I will do the square root. So this is what we call as the extracting the square root. However, this is the most important piece, class. Every time when you square root both sides, make sure you have the plus and minus sign. So, so when you see this, your square and square root will cancel. You will get x. You have a plus minus, and the square root of 4 is 2. So in your online homework, please do not put plus minus 2 like this in your answer. They will mark you wrong. So your answer in this case will be a positive 2 and a negative 2. So this is what your online homework wants you to do. So this is how we do this question using extracting the square root. Now, some students says, can I use this using the factor way? Okay, the one that you guys learned on the first method. The answer is yes. So you just, if you want to do it the factor way, first it has to be in a general form, which we did have in the general form. So what we need to do next is to factor. This is a 2 terms factor, so they are perfect square. And they are the conjugate. So the factor in this case will be x minus 2 and x plus 2. And don't forget, they must be equal to 0. So this is the factor for x squared minus 4. And then you will use the zero product property, means you have to set each one of these factor becomes 0. So x minus 2 becomes 0, and x plus 2 becomes 0. And then the last thing you need to do here is to solve each one of this. So you add 2 to this. So x in this case will be 2. You minus 2 on the other one. So you get x equals to negative 2. So you will still get the same answer as using the extracting the square root procedure. But as I mentioned, class, no matter what way you do, you will still get the same answer. And again, I tell you one more time, you can only use this extracting square root procedure if there is no middle term. So that is kind of like the condition to watch out for. Okay. So can you do the extracting the square root for question 1? The answer is no. Why we cannot use the extracting square root for question 1 is because we have the middle term. Okay. So so make sure that you guys know why some of this we can only do in this form. I mean, there are 4 methods, right? So why some of these we can do in this method and why some of this doing on the other method is because of that conditions. Okay, so let's take a look at question number 2 here. So you have to solve this equation using the extracting the square root. So I'm going to do 2a here. So we will have 3x squared equals to 36. Now, again, we can use the extracting the square root is because we don't have the x term, the middle term here. So how do we do the extracting the square root procedure here is we want to make x by itself, something like solving equations that you guys learned in the first the section that you guys learned on Thursday. So the first thing I need to do is to get rid of, to make x by itself, I need to get rid of this 3. And this 3 has been multiplied to the x squared. So I have to divide them. So when you divide this by 3, you will get x squared equals to 12. Okay. Like what we did last time, in order for us to get rid of the square, we have to square root both sides. And when you square root both sides, you have the plus and minuses. That is the most important things that you need to know when you guys do this method. The square and square root on this side will cancel out, so you get x. Now, last time you do root of 4, we know root of 4 is a perfect square of 2. However, 12 is not a perfect square, so you have to break it down. So how do you break it down is we know that 12 is 4 times 3. And 4 is a perfect square of 2. Now, don't forget the plus minus is in front. Okay, so how do you write your answer for this case? Now, it is not written down as 2 plus minus square of 3. This is considered wrong. Why this is considered wrong is because this is not multiplying. As you know that these are all multiplied. In order for us to get 12, you multiply 4 and 3. This is actually adding and subtracting. Okay, so this is not the correct way to answer this question. So the correct way to answer this question is you have to put the 2 after the plus minus sign. So this is telling us that we are multiplying here. So this is 2 times square root of 3. So again, when you do it in your online homework, they don't accept this plus minus answer. So you have to write your answer twice. One is a positive 2 root 3, and the other one is a negative 2 root 3. So these are your answers here. As I mentioned, you can get up to 2 answers in this case. Anyone have any questions for me? Anyone? I wish I am so much better, but I'm so sorry. I just got this sickness. I usually don't get easily sick, but I don't know why this time I was sick so easily. But life must go on. The show must go on. So we'll continue with B. So again, in B, we will use the extracting the square roots method to do question B. So then I'll show you another method to do question 2B. Okay. So just want to point out to you that as long as you get the same answer, I'm good to go. So same thing happens when you do your homework. If your homework says, I want you to do this method and that method, and you find out that, you know what, no, I want to do method that, factoring or that method, be my guest. As long as your answer is correct, I'll be fine. Okay. So in question 2B, if you want to do this in the extracting method, now since that is a square in this case, so in order for us to cancel the square, we take the square root. We will have plus minus. Okay, don't forget, every time when you take a square on both sides, make sure you have the sign for plus and minuses. The square and square root will cancel. So what we left in this case is a minus 1. Now we need to break square root of 10. Now the only factor that goes to 10 is 2 times 5. And unfortunately, 2 nor 5 are perfect square. So that's the reason why that we cannot break square root of 10 down, because neither of the factors are perfect square. So what is the square root of 10? When you break it down, it is still the same as square root of 10. But don't forget the plus minus. And what we need to do here is we have to get rid of this minus 1. So in order for us to get rid of this minus 1 is we add 1. So your answer in this case is plus minus square root of 10 plus 1. Or if you want to write this down, this is 1 plus minus square root of 10. Again, you can always switch around your, if that addition only happens when the addition, you can switch your your terms around. Again, when you do this in your test, I take both of these answers, but only for your online homework, you need to write your answer as 2. One is 1 plus root 10, and the other one is 1 minus root 10. So this is your answer that we're looking for. Okay, so we'll do another methods that you guys later on when we finish doing the other two. Now, the reason why that I cannot show you the factoring method on this question 2b here is very easy. This polynomial is not factorable. Okay, as I mentioned that if you want to use the factoring method, you have to know that the quadratic has to be factorable. This fellow is not factorable. So how do David know this? Okay, this is not a magic. This is not something that I don't want to share. I'll share to you. How do I how do I know? Excuse me. So how do I know that this is not factorable? Is looking at your answers. That is the one thing I can tell. If you just tell me this question, I cannot tell you it's not factorable or factorable. Once you finish solving it, then I can tell this is not factorable. One of the reasons why this is not factorable is your solution is in the square root form. Okay, this is something that you guys, needs kind of like a little, like when you go cook ramen noodles, you need to get a little bit of, you follow the steps, right? It's always the same, but we want to get something more like, ooh, this one, maybe I add something on it, right? So a little secret ingredient. So this kind of like a secret ingredient I will tell you here. So if your answer have a square root, then the polynomial is not factorable. Okay, so this is the reason why that we cannot do the first method, the factoring method here. The reason why is because we know the square root here has, your answer here has a square root. So that's the reason why that I can tell you that we cannot do this in the factor way. Okay, so so what happens if your polynomial is not factorable? You can use the square root procedure that we have there. But as you know that the square root procedure is only happens when you have no middle term. Okay, so then we can use the other two methods. So these two methods that I'm showing to you, they are exactly the same, but one of them takes a bit more longer time to do it. Okay, this method, the third method, is what we call as completing the square. Okay, so this completing the square is only happens where you want to write your your quadratic equations into a binomial, and this binomial has to be a perfect square. That means it is exactly the same binomial. So x plus 2 squared, or another meaning, x plus 2 times x plus 2. So in order for us to do this completing the square piece, you have to make sure that your leading coefficient has to be x squared. Okay, so this is the completing the squares procedure. So this is your first step to do your the completing squares. Completing square is one of the most least favorite methods to solve quadratic. The reason why is because it is the most difficult and most challenging ways to do it. So when you complete the square, the first step you need to do here is make sure that your leading coefficient is 1. If your leading coefficient is not 1, then you have to divide all the equations by the leading coefficient before you perform this. Okay, so that means that if you have 2, you have to if your leading coefficient is a 2 or 2x squared, you have to divide all the equations by 2. Our main goal here is to make your leading coefficient as 1. And then what you need to do on the second step here is to separate your variables on one side and your number, which is the constant term, on the other side. Okay, so that is your second step in this case, is to separate your variables. Now don't forget, this variable consists of both x squared and x. Okay, this variable side here consists of both x squared and x, and then the number is on the other side. And then what you need to do on the third step, this is where it's going to get really tough here, is you're going to take the middle term, which is the x term. You're going to divide that by 2. And then you have to square it. Okay, so you have to take the middle term, which is the b, and you have to take the divide by 2 and square. And this number you have to add to both sides of the equation. Okay. And then the fourth step is the left side, because the equation have left and the right side, can be factored. And that factor will be x plus b over 2 squared. So it will be what we call as a completing the squares. And then the right side is where you will have to add the numbers. This is a super difficult one. Okay. And the last thing we do on this is we have to use the extracting the square root property. So that means you have to square both sides. Now, this computing the square procedure is a 5 steps procedure. And I will tell you that no one here like it. I myself do not like it. Is that a shortcut to avoid computing the square? The answer is yes. That will be the last method, which is the quadratic formula. So this quadratic formula is usually used to override the computing the square, because computing the square is a very long 5 steps and it's a very difficult work that you have to do. I'm going to show it to you how to do computing the squares here. And again, class, you did not need to worry about this much, because I will concentrate more on the quadratic formula here. Okay, so so let's take a look at question 3. And then you will see what is all the steps going on. And then we'll do question 2b again using completing the square. X squared minus 4x minus 1 equals to 0. X squared minus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Now, we know that we cannot do factoring here. The reason why we cannot factor here, the first method, is because you cannot factor this. Can someone tell me what times what is 1? 1 times 1. But can you get a -4 using 1 and 1? No. So if you do this on your previous test or your P4, we call this as a prime, okay, because it's not factorable. And we cannot use the extracting the square root is because you have the middle term. So these questions, you have to force to use either by doing completing the squares or using the quadratic formula. Okay. What is the completing? Now we're going to do completing the square first. How do we do compute the squares? procedure, first step, make sure your leading coefficient is not, make sure your leading coefficient is 1. If your leading coefficient is not 1, then you have to divide everything by the leading coefficient, so you will get 1 itself. Now, the good news for this question is this is your leading coefficient is already 1. So you can skip the first step here because we got 1 in front, so we don't have to worry about it. Second step is where you begin to separate your variables and your numbers. So we want the variables on the left side, and we want to move or get rid of the numbers on the other side. And in order for us to get rid of that number, we will add 1. So what we have in this case will be x squared minus 4x equals to 1. So this is your second step, where you separate your variables on one side and your numbers on the other side. Your third step is where you take your middle term. So your middle term in this case is -4. And you divide this by 2 and you square it. So this is the middle term. It's where you take the b term, which is -4, divided by 2, and you square it, and you add this is a number here. You add this number to both sides of this equation. So can someone tell me what is -4 over 2?
-2.
And then when you square it, you get
4.
4. So this is the number. So once you get this number, you have to add it to both sides of the equation. In this case, 4. And then what you do is the left side of this equation can be factored. So this, including the 4 that you add, can be factored. And this factor is actually a perfect square. We call this a perfect square factor, where if you factor this, this is going to be x minus 2 times x minus 2. Now, where do I get the -2 from? The -2 came from this. So when you divide -4 by 2, you get -2. There is where the -2 come from. Okay. Some students ask me, David, is that always work that way? My answer to you is yes. It is always work that way, as long as you follow the steps. Okay. And 1 plus 4 on this side will give us 5. So this is step number 4, where you factor on the left side, and your factor is a perfect square factor, means they are the same but duplicate twice. And the last step we're going to do here is to extracting the square root, means we have to square root both sides to get rid of the square. But when you square root on both sides, we have to do the plus and minuses. So forget the plus minuses. So the square and square root will cancel. So what we have in this case is x minus 2. And again, what we found out that 5 in this case is a prime number. So that means that 5 cannot be broken down, not like 12 or 20, 50. They all can break it down to a perfect square. So next, the last thing we have to do here is to solve for x. So we have to add 2 to that side. So your answer in this case will be plus minus root 5 plus 2. Or if you want to write it down, it can be 2 plus minus root 5. Again, they are the same. As long as they are positive, you can do it. Now, class, can you do that if this is negative? Let me repeat. Can you do this when you have negative? Let's say you got plus minus root 5 minus 2. You can. What happened is that your 2 here will be negative. Your root 5 will have a plus minus. So make sure that you can do this as long as you take the sign on the left side. So this, you can still move it around, okay? So that is something that I will point out. Again, class, I'm not that picky about, which answer you get because they are the same. However, your online homework doesn't like the plus minus sign. So you have to write your answer in two answers. One is 2 plus root 5. One is 2 minus root 5. So this is how we solve this quadratic equation using completing the square, which is the 5 steps we do. A lot of work. And yes, you can, if you do not want to use this method, then I will introduce you the most famous method that we will use in this class. Questions, anyone? Okay, so we're going to talk about the most famous methods to solve a quadratic equation. And that method is called the quadratic formula. So as you remember that I allowed you guys to use one of the, again, same thing as your midterm, right? Your finals. You can use your cheat sheet. So make sure you have these quadratic formulas in there because it's very, very important. Because this formula is used to solve quadratic equation type. So when you have a quadratic equation in a general form, means that it has to be equal to 0. Then the quadratic equation is given us by the formula of x equals to negative b plus minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And when I say all over, the whole line. So you don't do partial. That means the denominator is everyone over. And what is ABC? A is your leading coefficient. B is your middle term. And C is your last term. Now, if you have something like this, like question 3, can someone tell me what is your ABC for question? This is very important. A is, what's the leading coefficient we have? That will be 1. Now your B in this case is the middle term. So anyone know what is B representing in this case, in this question?
-4.
Yes, the negative 4. If you put B as a positive 4, you will get it wrong. And the last one, C in this case, will be a negative 1. So make sure you guys know that your ABC does takes the sign to the left of your variable, your terms. So make sure you guys know that they're not always positive. It can be negative. Okay. So now this formula, where is this formula comes from? This formula actually derives, it comes from computing the square. Okay. This formula actually comes from computing the square. So what we do is we take these quadratic equations in the general form and we perform completing the square, and we will end up you having this quadratic formula. So let me show you the proof. How do we get this formula come from? Okay, so we have, this is a proof of quadratic formula. Okay, so we will have this general form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. You do not need to know this because I just want to tell you that all the mathematics formula that you guys know is not comes from Bible or God or wherever it is, it comes from proving. So like the other formulas that you will learn in today's class, which is the Pythagorean theorem, it comes from Pythagoras. So that's why it's been proved like 2,000, 3,000 years old. So these are all come from formulas. It's been proved. So it's not something that, that is from, it's like a magic. Okay. So what do we do with this general form is we perform the computing the squares. And what is the first step to computing the square is to make sure your leading coefficient is 1. Now, unfortunately, we do have an A that is a leading coefficient. So since our leading coefficient is not 1, then we have to divide the equations by the leading coefficient. So I have to divide all this by A. Okay. So what we do here is your A is cancelled. Now our A here is 1. But don't forget, we have the B over AX. And we get C over A. Okay, they all become fraction here. 0 over anything is still going to be 0. So 0 over A will be 0. So this is your first step, is where you make your leading coefficient as 1. Next is to separate your variables and your numbers. So we will move this over that side. So I will subtract C over A. So I will take X squared plus B over AX. So my variables is on one side. 0 minus C over A, I get negative C over A. So we got the second step here, which we will separate your variables with your numbers. And then the third step is where you take your middle term, which is this middle term, B over A. This is your middle term. And you have to divide this by 2 and square it. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more tough. And then after that, you find this, you have to add it to both sides. So this is the same thing as B over A divided by 2, like what we did in the complex fraction. So we can change this division to become multiplication, but we have to flip this number. So 2 will become 1/2. So this is actually B over 2A, because this is when you multiply fractions, you multiply straight across. And don't forget, you have to square this. We just did the B over 2. We have to square this. So when you square this, you will get B squared over 4A squared. So you square the B, you square the 2, and you square the A. So this, you have to add it to both sides of the equation. B squared over 4A squared. And B squared over 4A squared. So this, what we are doing here is step number 3, where you take the middle term divided by 2 and square, and you add that term to both sides of the equation. That's step number 3. Step number 4, the left side here can be factored. And that factor is going to be x plus something squared. If you remember last time, this is actually the same as the term before we square it. So this will be B over 2A. And then on this side, we have to add your fractions up. So in order for you, let's just C squared. What the heck am I writing down here? There's no C squared here. There's only A squared. It's B squared over 4A squared. In order for us to add this fraction, you have to find the LCD in this case. And your LCD in this case will be 4A squared. So in order for us to get this as a 4A squared, I have to multiply this by 4A. This one I do not need to multiply because it's with 4a squared. So now my denominator here will be having 4a squared. So as long as you have the same denominator, we can add this up. So this is negative 4, this is a multiply sign here. Negative 4ac plus b squared. Now I do not, I can switch them around like last time. So instead of writing negative 4ac plus b squared, I can write that as b squared minus 4ac. Because I can switch them around. Okay. So that is step number 4, where we do left side we factor, we add the right sides. And the last thing we're going to do, class, is to use the square root both sides. So we will square root both sides here. And don't forget to put a plus minus. So this and this will cancel. So I got x plus b over 2a. And now 4a squared is a perfect square of 2a, because 4 is a perfect square of 2 and a squared is a perfect square of a. So what we have here is we still have the plus minus b squared minus 4ac on top. And the last thing we're going to do, class, is to solve for x. So I move this over there. So because it's a plus, so it becomes minus b over 2a. Now, the good news is they're having the same denominator. So when you add or subtract fraction, if they're having the same denominator, you do not need to find the LCD. You just add this up. So you can write this as plus minus square root b squared minus 4ac. I'm going to draw this line a little bit longer. So that means it's covered all the way to the ac here. Minus b. Or I can switch these two around to become negative b plus minus square root of p squared minus 4ac. So I can move things around. So this is what we call as your quadratic formula. And this formula actually comes from completing the square. So do you need to know this? No. Okay, I just want to tell you that every single thing that we did here is all comes from proving something. Yeah, this is very complicated. That's the reason why that if you are a major in math, this is what we do. We have to prove every single formula that was created in this world. Every single one of them. And this is considered the most easiest one. Okay. So that's the reason why I'm not going to scare you guys. So I just want to tell you where is this formula comes from. So now we have name for this. We know this whole formula is called quadratic formula. Now, the quantity under the radical sign, the radicand, b squared minus 4ac, is what we call as the discriminant. Okay. What is this discriminant is used for? Okay. It sounds like so criminal, right? Discriminant, it's like criminal here. Actually, this discriminant will tell us what is going on to our graph. So if your b squared minus 4ac, which is your discriminant, is positive, then we can tell that you will have two distinct real solutions, and you will have two x-intercept on the graph. So what happens when you do the b squared minus 4ac came out positive? Then you get two answers, like what we did so far, right? Every single questions we did, the examples we did here, they all have two answers. One is 2, one is negative 2, right? So when you look at the graph will cross this at two different x-intercept. So what do I mean in this case is, let me just, so if your b squared minus 4ac is positive, when you look at your graph, this kind of graph is what we call as a parabola. they will intercept at 2 answers. So you will get 2 solutions. Okay. What happens when your discriminant b squared minus 4ac is exactly 0? Then you will only have one repeated solution. Or if you look at the graph, you can only cross this at one x-intercept. So what does that mean here is, if you got this to be exactly 0, your graph will only cross one point at the x-intercept. So in this case, you only get one solution, and this solution will be repeat. Now, what does that mean when I say the solution is repeat? For example, you will get x minus 1 squared. So this is what happens when your discriminant is 0, means you only get one answer, and that answer in this case is 1. And how do I get 1? You just make this equals to 0 and solve for x. So that's why you get 1. Okay. So you only get one solution in this case, and that solution is repeat. Repeat means you got it twice. Okay. And the last thing is, what happens if your discriminant is a negative number? Then you have no real solution. The graph will not cross on the x-axis. That means there's no x-intercept. And you get 2 complex solutions. And you will learn this in Wednesday class. Okay. So what do I mean if your b squared minus ac, your discriminant is negative? Your graph will not cross on the x-axis. So you will get no solution. Or another meanings, your solution here is what we call as a complex solution. And you will learn what is complex solution. So this is the power of the discriminant, which is b squared minus 4ac. So mostly this discriminant is used especially when you want to graph. So we want to figure out how many x-intercept do we have. If you have 2 x-intercept, then the discriminant is positive. You have 1, your discriminant has to be exactly 0. If no x-intercept, means your discriminants are negative.
Can you show that what you just drew again?
The discriminant is used to figure out how many times your graph, how many x-intercept you have on the graph. So
no, what you just drew, can you show that one more time?
It's right over here. So if your discriminant is positive, you will cross your x-intercept twice. If your discriminant is 0, you cross your x-intercept only one time. And your discriminant is negative, it never crosses. That is the main part of the discriminant. You got it, Karim?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. So this is mostly used for telling us how many times does it cross on the graph. Usually it's using on the graph piece in this case. And you will use this when you go to college algebra. So in college algebra, we'll be talking more about this. But what I really want to concentrate on this class is not discriminant. So you do not need to worry. You will see this again when you go to college algebra. This is not, I mean, it's important. This is not, I mean, which one is more important if I really want you guys to know? Quadratic formula. That is the most important formulas. And I need to know, I need to teach you how to apply this, especially when you solve a quadratic equation. This is the most important piece. Now, remember question 3? So we did question 3 before. Okay. We did question 3 using completing the square. Now, as I mentioned early on, you can also do question 3 using quadratic formula. So this is question 3 that we do, okay, that we got the answer here. So let's do question 3 again, but this time using the quadratic formula, and your answer is still the same. So I'm going to point out to you, this is your answer. So I'm going to redo question 3 again. And I'm going to do this in quadratic formula type. Okay. So that means your A in this case will be 1. Your B in this case will be -4. Your C in this case will be -1. Now here comes the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula, some students ask me, how do you memorize formulas? Keep on writing it till you memorize it. Same thing like your kindergarten teachers. How do you memorize your name? You wrote your name a lot of times during kindergarten, the first few days of class, right? Same thing happens. Rewrite this formula until it gets sticks into your mind. And by the time you got the formula, good. Okay. So this is the quadratic formula. -b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're going to plug all this ABC into here. So the first thing is we have the B. So we're going to plug B inside here. Now, since there is a negative and our B is a negative, so that 2 negative will become positive. Okay. And then we have to square this whole B. So as you know that when you square a -4, this will become +16. Okay. And then we have -4 times A. A is 1 and C is -1. So we got A is 1, C is -1, all over by 2 times A, which is 1. So you just plug all this into your quadratic form. Now we will do the discriminant. So we're gonna multiply all this up and then add. So this is the same thing as 16. Now, -4 times 1 is a -4. -4 times -1, this is +4. So this is actually 20. Common students make mistake on this discriminant is they distribute the -4 into the 1 and -1. That will be wrong. So please do not distribute that. It's been multiplied. Or in other words, you can use your calculator and you multiply this. Now, when you multiply the first one, it's not 4, it's a -4. Okay, this is a -4 times 1 times -1. So this is why I got a +4. Okay, so make sure you guys know how to do this, especially very important. And then you add, because this is a positive now, so you add 16, this is 20. So 16 plus 4 is 20. So this will give us 4 plus minus square root of 20 over 2. Now 20 can be reduced or can be break it down to become root 4 and root 5. And 4 is a perfect square of 2, right? Because that is a perfect square number. So this is actually is 4 plus minus 2 root 5 over 2. Now this is where the most students make mistake here, so pay attention. So this is you need to simplify this. So a lot of students will cancel the 2 and your answer came out to be 4 plus root 5 plus minus 5. This answer is not correct? So do not do this. Okay, I just tell you again, do not do this. You will get a wrong answer. So how do we fix this? In order for us to fix this, you separate this into two. So the division, you over 2, you do it over 2. That means you separate the denominator over 2. And this, you can do 4 over 2 is 2. And the 2 and 2 can cancel here. This is 5. So this is your answer. This is a correct way to do this. So please do not do this way. This is wrong. Is this the same answer as what we have on question 3? Yes. So as I mentioned, all your quadratic equations can be solved using quadratic formula. So this quadratic formula is what we call as a universal formula to solve quadratic equation. What is the meaning when I say this is a universal formula to solve a quadratic equation? Means that no matter what quadratic equations you have, is there can be factor or not, do you have a middle term or no middle term or not, this formula can solve it. So that's why this formula is used a lot, especially those students who are struggling with factoring. Guess what? You can still use this formula as long as you put this in the general form. Okay. So I want you guys to go ahead and try question 4A using the quadratic formula. Very important formula.
And so once again, if it's like on number 4, A, we have the 3x squared.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just plug that in because we have to break it down.
No. We are not factoring. We are using the quadratic formula to solve this.
Okay.
Your A is the first number.
You're right. 3x squared.
We don't need do I put x squared here? I did not put. I'm talking about coefficient. You remember coefficients?
Oh, that's right.
No x involved. What is B is the middle term coefficient, and C is the constant term coefficient. They are all coefficient, means no variables.
Well, that makes it a lot easier. Okay.
You haven't learned that there are sometimes there are variables in there. You are not in that level yet.
Okay, good. I'll try it.
This is the main part of this. All right. Anyone know what is your A, B, C in question 4A? Oh, before we continue A, B, C, is this in a general form? Means is this equals to 0? And your power from high to low. We have that. So if this is not equal to 0 or this is not arranged from high to low, that means it's not in a general form. In other words, you have to make it as a general form. Okay, so this is a general form. So anyone know what is ABC here? So A in this case will be 3. B in this case will be 2. C will be -10. Now plug all this ABC into your quadratic formula. Go and do it now, and I'm gonna get some water. Very important class. Anyone? So you plug B inside here, you get what? -2 plus minus B squared. So that will become 4 because 2 times 2 is 4. Minus 4 times A. A in this case will be 3. Plug 3 in here. C, now your C in this case is -10. And they're all inside the square root. All over by 6 because our A is 3. So 2 times 3 will give us 6. So take out your calculator and I want you to figure out what is this number is. 4 minus 4 times 3 minus times -2. So this will give you 4 plus 120 because 4 times 3 is negative 4 times 3 is -12 times -10 is positive 120. So this is square of 124. Now this is where you begin to break it down. Remember how we break a square root down is they have to be a perfect square. And that perfect square has to be a big number. So I take 124 divided by 4. Looks like it works. So 124 can be broken down to become 4 and 31. And 4 is a perfect square of 2. So this will give us -2 plus and minus. This whole square root will be written down as 2 root 31 because 124 is 2 root 31 over by 6. But as I mentioned, I don't make it all over by 6 now. I will separate this into 2 because 2 and 6 can be reduced. So we know that 2 goes into 6 3 times. So what we have in this case is -1 over 3 plus minus root 31 over 3. So this is your answer for question 4A. Again, in your homework, make sure you write this answer as 2. One of them is plus, and then the other one is a minus. So this is your answer in this case. In my test, I take plus minus. I'm not as picky as your online homework, but in your online homework, they do not take plus and minuses. You have to have your answer in 2.
So on the homework, this is how we write it. We write the top part and the bottom part.
Oh, you just put a comma and then put that answer next.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. Question 4b. You do it. You guys all have to do this. I already know my formulas already. The question is, do you? So try question 4. Again, those students who do not know your quadratic formula, I want you to write the quadratic formula like 100 times. In the take out a notebook, write this formula 100 times. It's like writing your own name, right? Like write 100 times till it stick to your mind or stick it to your, and this formula is used throughout the whole, not just college algebra, trigonometry, every class. It's one of the most famous quadratic formula. Anyone know what is an ABC here? A is two, B is -4, and C is 1. So plug all this into your formulas, in the quadratic formulas. So we got a -4. So when you plug inside here, you will get a +4 because double negative will make him positive. And when you take the square of the b, that means you square this whole thing, that will give us 16 positive. -4 times A is 2, times C is 1. Now, I just want to say that, class, if you multiply by 1, you can ignore it. The reason why is anything multiplied by 1, you still get the same thing. So that's why you multiply by 1. Over by 2A, because A is 2, so 2 times 2 will give us 4. So this will make it a little bit more easier to do, because this is 16 minus 8, because 4 minus 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. So this is square root of 8. But we know root 8 can be break it down to become root 4 and root 2. And 4 is the perfect square of 2. So this can be written down as 4 plus minus 2 root 2 over 4. So 8 is 2 root 2. And as I mentioned early on, I do not want to make it all over 4. So I will break it down into 2 4s. Now the 4 and 4 here will cancel because 4 divided by 4 is 1. 2 over 4 is 1/2. So your answer in this case will be 1 plus minus 1/2 times root 2. So this is your answer for question 4B. So this is your homework, and I will look at your homework. Your homework class is to do 4C. And you required to submit this homework by Wednesday in class. I think I'm feeling much better. I will see the doctor today. I did make an appointment. So hopefully I'll be in class. So this is your homework on today class 4C. You have to solve this quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. And I want to see it. If you did not do this homework, I will mark you absent for today's class. So kind of like attendance going on here. And I will look at some other stuff too. So I recommend you to try to work on 4C, and that's your homework. And I do want to see it by Wednesday in class. Okay. So try to do that on your own. So these are the 4 methods that I show it to you. Okay. Yes, Karim.
I'm trying to remember here how I see how you did the 4/4 and the 2 root 2 over 4, and I know where you got the 1 plus or minus. Where did I think I see.
Okay.
Oh, 2 into 4. That's how you got the half.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're gonna do some application problems here. So that's why this is word problems. So that's where the word problems come in your test here. There are 4 types of word problems that can be used for quadratic equations. How do we get positive 4? Because our b is a negative 4. So when you plug it into here, you get double negative. And that's where the 2 negative will become positive. So we will continue with our applications here. So there are 4 types of applications that we can use. One is an application problem that deals with area, okay? Especially area of a rectangle. Does anyone remember what is the area of a rectangle?
The length times width times height?
No, that is area, that's volume. So it's just length times width. Okay, so that is the area of a rectangle, which is length times width. We will be using that, this area, mostly we'll use this area rectangle to do this. And you will get what we call as a quadratic equations. And then after you have to solve it. Again, there are 4 methods to do it, the one that we just learned. Another type of application problem that we'll be using for this, it will be what we call as position equation. Now, what is a position equation? A position equation is where the equations of an object, where is the height of the falling object. So as you know that when you go, if let's say you go up to the 3rd floor of a building, you start to drop, I don't know, a rock down to the floor. And in order for us to figure out how far or what is the height of the rock when they keep falling based on time, because every second, the height of the rock is getting closer and closer to the ground. In this case, 0, ground 0. So the equations of a position here is given us by this formula. Okay, where S in this case stands for the height of the object. So that means how tall, let's say in 3 minutes or 3 seconds, what is the height of the object in this case? V0 is the initial velocity of the object. So in this case, how fast the object travels. And S0 is the initial height. So let's say you're really in the 3rd floor, and the 3rd floor is, let's say, is 100 feet, for example. So you're dropping 100 feet from the 3rd floor down to the ground at 0 feet. and you want to figure out how tall is what is the height of the object when they fall after t, after how many times it goes. So usually out of 1s, t, 2, v0, 3, and s0, there are 4 variables here. The question will provide you 3 out of these 4 variables, and you have to find what is the 4th one. And usually in this case, the question will provide you the initial velocity, that means how fast the object goes, initial height, how tall, when do we go, and they will ask you what is the height. They want you to figure out the time. Okay, so this is usually what the question wants you to do. So again, you do not need to worry much about the second application because you will see that in your homework, but not in my test. The third type of application is modeling changing over time. That one also we will not do a lot in this case, but the last one is the one that we'll be doing. Is the most famous theorem, the Pythagorean theorem. So this is another theorem you need to know or memorize. This Pythagorean theorem is only work for right triangles. And I think you guys know which one is A and B and C, right? Anyone? So using Pythagorean theorem. You only work for right triangle. So right triangle means it forms 90 degrees. A and B has to be the legs of the triangle. Legs means the one that forms the 90 degrees. And C has to be the hypotenuse. So this is the Pythagorean theorem that you need to know, very important theorem. So these are the 2 application problems that we'll be using a lot in our class, especially during tests, is the quadratic equation that involved with area and the Pythagorean theorem. These are the 2 major ones. So let's take a look at the first type of application problem that use the area formula, which is question 5. Okay. So question number 5 is telling us that we have a rectangular kitchen, which is 6 feet longer than its height, and the area of this rectangle kitchen is given us by 112 square feet. The question wants you to find the dimension of this kitchen. When they ask for dimension, means I want you to figure out what is the length and what is the width. Dimension is the length and the width. So in order for you to do this kind of questions, we have to draw pictures. Usually when you guys have like a geometry type questions, like a rectangle or circle or triangles, we draw a picture. So this picture is a rectangle. And it's given us that the length, this is the length, and this is the width. Usually the width is shorter than the length. The length is 6 feet longer than its width. So one of these has to be x, and the other one has to be in terms of x. So how do we know which one is x? This is a clue I always tell my students. If you read this sentence, which one comes at the very end? The length or the width? And that will be your x. Let me repeat again. This is very important, especially when you do word problems. If you read this question, which one comes to the very end? The length or the width? The one that comes at the end is your x. So can someone tell me which one is your x in this case? The length or the width? So you find out that the white comes the very end, right? And white is the same thing as what? Length or width? That will be your width. So that means your width in this case will be X. Your length in this case will be 6 feet longer than its width. So when you say 6 feet longer, means that it's at 6. So this will be X plus 6. So this is how we figure out how we put the expression when you have this kind of word problems. So you have to figure out which one is X and which one is in terms of X. So this is the one that X always comes at the end. In this case, is your width. And your length in this case is 6 feet longer, means you have to add 6. So another meaning is if your width is 2 feet, then your length will be 8, which is 6 feet longer than it. Okay, 6 plus 2 is 8. They say that the area of this rectangle is given us by 112 square feet. So we have to use the area formula. And the area formula in this case is length times width, where the area is 112. Now length is X plus 6. And your width in this case is X. So the area is 112. The length is X plus 6. The width is X. So in order for us to solve for X, which means we need to find the dimension, which is the width and the length. If you know X, the width, you should know the length. You have to solve these equations. Now, in order for us to solve this equation, we have to make this as a standard, your general form. So we have to distribute your X and make it equals to 0. So we got 112 equals to X squared minus plus 6X, plus X times X is X squared, and X plus times 6 is 6X. And then we have to subtract 112 there. So when you we want to make it equal to 0. So we will subtract 112. So this is what we call as the general form of the quadratic equation. So now we need to solve for X, and there are 4 ways to do it. You can either do it by factoring. You cannot do the extracting the square root. The reason why is because it has the middle term X in there. You can do computing the squares, which I don't want you to do it, or you can use quadratic formula here. So there are, a few ways you can do this, how to solve for X here. So if you want, you can solve this using factoring. So I'm going to try this using factoring. Now, again, if you do not like to use this using factoring, then I will strongly suggest you to do the quadratic formula. As you know that when you do factoring, it has GCF, so there's no GCF here. It's a 3 terms with the leading coefficient of 1. So this is actually a very fast factor, which means that you do not need to do the AC method. The only downfall in this case is you need to give me all the multiples or all the factors. So when you multiply it, you get 112. Now, this is the difficult part of this factoring. So what times what is 112? So let's try 112 with anyone? Try with 6. So 6 doesn't work because it's all decimals. Let's try 8. Oh, 112 and 8 works. 8 and 14. So 8 and 14 works. Because if you look at your calculator, 8 times 14 is 112. And the good news is 8 and 14 can give us 6, right? So which one of these is plus and which one of this is negative? So 14 should be plus, 8 should be minus, because that will give us a positive 6. So the factor in this case is x minus 8 and x plus 14. And they're all equals to 0. And so this is a factor for it. So what we need to do next is to set all this factor become 0. So x minus 8 becomes 0. And x plus 14 becomes 0. So we will solve for x here. So x will be 8, because you add 8 on this one. And x in this case will be negative 14. However, you cannot take negative 14. The reason why you cannot take negative 14 is because you cannot have a negative fit. Because this is a dimension. Can you tell me what is a negative 14 feet looks like? If you can tell me and show it to me, let me know. I want to be famous too. Okay. So that's the reason why that when you do word problems, you need to watch out for your answer. You used to have 2 answers, and we only take the positive answer in this case is because you cannot have a negative 14 feet. So we will plug 8 into this value here. So now we can figure out that my width in this case is going to be 8 feet. And my length in this case will be 8 plus 6 because it's x plus 6, which is 14 feet. So the dimension of this rectangle is 8 by 14 or 14 by 8, doesn't matter which one comes first. This is the dimension of this rectangle. Again, class, I just want to point out to you here is the reason why that this negative 14 is not good or is being crossed out is because we cannot have a negative fit when you talk about it. Some students think about this and they say, oh, David, so in other words that if my x came out negative, I just simply drop it like what you do here. Not necessary, class, because this kind of questions is a word problem. So when you do word problems only, then you have to think about what is called as the domain constraint, means that what works and what doesn't work. But if you just simply solve like question 1 that we did earlier on, that we did here, we got these 2 numbers. But why these 2 answer is your answer? This 2 solution is your answer because this is not a word problem. This is just an equation. So if you get equation like this, then your answer can be positive and can be negative. Yes, it can be both. So please do not say, oh, David say that if you see any negative number, drop it. No. It only works when you do word problems. Are these word problems we are doing on the first few examples? No, these are not your word problems. So that's the reason why you do not drop these negative numbers here. Well, David say all the negative you cannot have negative feet. But my question is, are these word problems we're doing? This is not word problems. It can be temperature. Can we have a negative temperature? Oh yes, we can have negative temperature. So that's the reason why that when you guys think, when you guys do word problems, you have to think another step, which is once you get your answer, does that mean that is your final answer? Okay, so that means like when you get this, so that means you have to think about why we cannot take this answer. And this is only happens when you do the word problem piece. Okay, so we are talking about areas, and we know you cannot have a negative fit. So this is what we call as domain constraint. This is something that in college algebra, a lot of students having this what we call as a domain constraint here. Means that we know that we cannot have a negative answer when we talk about areas and length and width, right? So that's why you cannot get part of your answers in this case. But if I just want to solve this equation without doing any areas or length, then yes, your answer will be 8 and -4. Do you guys got what I'm trying to say to you?
Yes, are you going to do this in the with the quadratic formula?
Yes, it's the same thing. You can also do this with the quadratic formula. And it's going to be very icky. The reason why I say it's very icky because of this big number. You can use this using quadratic formulas. Yep. And your answer is still going to be these two answers. And then this answer will be dropped because of the negative value. Okay, and I'm going to do the last question, and then when we come back on Wednesday, I will do the other two. So so I'm going to go through the last. This is a Pythagorean, which is very important. So we'll talk questions 6 and 7 later on. So this one's gonna be tough. You know what? We're just gonna do these 3 on Wednesday because those 3 questions are pretty tough over here. So I'm just gonna do 1 questions regarding Pythagorean theorem, so you guys know it's not over here. So let's say that again we're gonna use Pythagorean theorem here. So I just want to show it to you how to do it. So let's say you got a right triangle, and let's say this is 5 inches or 5 feet or 5. This is 7, and you need to figure out what is your hypotenuse in this case. So in order for us to figure this one out, which is again very important, is we have to use the Pythagorean formula, which is a squared plus b squared equals to c squared. So you need to know which one is your a, which one is your b, and which one is c. So as I mentioned, a and b are the one that form the 90 degrees. So this is your a and this is your b. And some students ask me, David, can I switch these two around? Yes. However, the hypotenuse is always the longest one, which is right across from the 90 degrees. That's your c. So when you plug all this back into this Pythagorean theorem, so we got a, which is 5 squared, so 25. B is 7 squared, which is 49. And this is c squared, which is x squared in this case, we doesn't know. So we just need to add these numbers up. So 25 plus 49 is 74. And then in order for us to get rid of this square, we need to do the square root. And every time we do square root, you need to have plus and minuses. Now the square and square root will cancel, you get x. Now the plus and minuses is not needed here. The reason why is because this is the length. As you know, that length of a triangle cannot be negative, right? Always be positive. So that's the reason why that you do not need to worry about putting plus and minuses in this question, because you cannot be negative. So what we need to do is break 74 down. So remember how we break numbers down? We divide with perfect square. So let's try with 4, because 4 is a perfect square. That doesn't work. What's the next? 4, 9 is a perfect square. That doesn't work, doesn't divide evenly. 9, 16. That doesn't work. 25. That doesn't work. 36. Looks like none of these numbers work. 49. So these are all perfect square. So none of this doesn't work, means that your answer in this case will be just square root of 7. 2 is not a perfect square, Victor. Don't forget, 2 is not a perfect square, so we cannot use 2.
Can you say that again about what side the 5 will always be? I mean, the A or
the A and B is the one that always form the 90 degrees.
Okay.
And the C is always across from the the hypotenuse, which is the longest one. It's across from the 90 degrees. So this is how the Pythagorean theorem works here. It's very important. So when you guys come to class on Wednesday, we will finish continuing with this section here. Okay, so we still have 3 word problems left. 2 of them is going to talk about, one of them is talking about the rock dropping. The other one is Pythagorean. This one is mostly word problems. And then I still want you guys to do this homework, which is 4C. This is super crucial, important class. If you doesn't know the quadratic formula, you probably will not going to do well in college algebra, because this is one of the most basic formulas that you need to know. Okay. So that's it for today. So your homework is try to do 4C here. That's one question here. And then we'll finish the rest tomorrow, Wednesday, I'm sorry. And then you will have only one homework due on Wednesday, which is 1.2. But as I tell you early on, you got 4 homework dues on next week. So do not procrastinate, because next week is our last week. Week 5 is our last week. Your final is going to be on Thursday, September 22nd. And your final will consist of this 5 sections: 1, 2, 1, 4, 1, 5, 1, 6, 1, 7. And yes, there will be word problems involved. Okay. I haven't set a test yet, so do not ask me what kind. Hopefully I will do it by this week, end of the week. Hopefully I feel much better, I should be able to do that. Questions, anyone?
Yes, so I'm looking at, again, what we just did after we do input everything into the quadratic equation. And I see what the, I'm doing 4C, what the square root is left. I'm trying to remember, how do we break that down again?
We use the perfect squares, like what we did here.
Okay.
So we take 74 divided by all the perfect square. You guys did this before in the first chapter P. Remember when you do 50? How we break 50 down? Square root of 50.
I can't recall right now. Oh,
so, one of these has to be perfect squares. So Kareem, that's something that I'm worried about you now. Yep, we did this before, so